The first goal is to tame this pandemic, prevent as many infections as possible, treat those who have infections or COVID disease. Second major step is to prevent infection to ourselves, because unless we are hale and hearty, we will not be able to serve others. And then only we want to think of what our primary job was as surgeons, as nurses. But having taken the first two steps, now it is time for us to go back to our primary job, that is to treat patients who require endocrine or breast surgical care. So I think it is very important that we all be sure of what all is required of us to ensure that we are safe, and to ensure that um, all others in our working group are safe. So this mini symposium we are holding today is essentially looking at how do we ensure safety at our workplace, ensure no infection occurs to all of us. So to begin with, Dr. Abhishek will provide the introduction, and then go ahead. Can I request everyone who's not speaking to mute their mics? There's a bit of echo, that is perhaps because of some microphones are not muted. I can see one Redmi logged in, which is not muted. And Neka, can you please mute your microphone? And Redmi, please mute yourself. Who's Redmi? All those who are not speaking, please mute their microphones. Otherwise, we'll continue to have this echo. There are, yeah, whose phone is Redmi? Redmi. Yeah, now Redmi is muted. SM needs to mute. Neka needs to mute. Okay. Now, Abhishek, please go ahead.
The following topics have to be discussed today. Firstly, should all patients be tested for COVID-19 before surgery? How and when? This will be discussed by me. Next is personal protection required for operating COVID negative patient, which will discuss Dr. Vikram. Thereafter, personal protection while operating the rational use of PPE will be discussed by Dr. Malika. Next will be strategy for reducing potential exposure of healthcare workers to COVID infection, and this will be discussed by Dr. Vishwa. And at last, nursing practice in OT during COVID pandemic, which will be discussed with Dr. Vijay. So, coming to the first topic. Yeah, so coming to the first topic, should all patients be tested for COVID before surgery? How and when? A little background about this COVID pandemic first. So, in the late December 2019, an outbreak of pneumonia of unknown cause occurred in Wuhan, Hubei province of China. And the underlying causative agent of this pneumonia was identified as a novel coronavirus that was initially named as severe acute respiratory syndrome coronavirus type 2, and the disease related to it as coronavirus disease 2019, COVID-19 by WHO. Later, WHO named this pathogenic virus as 2019 novel coronavirus, and on March 11th, 2020, WHO declared COVID-19 as a pandemic disease. Patients who are infected with SARS coronavirus have a higher perioperative morbidity and mortality. There's an unexpected progression to acute respiratory distress syndrome, cardiac injury, kidney failure, and even deaths that has been observed in patients infected with SARS coronavirus who have undergone surgical procedures. And also the aerosolizing procedures which takes place in the operating room, they place the OR staff at great risk of being infected with SARS coronavirus. So a robust screening as well as testing program to detect the SARS coronavirus is essential for the safety of patients as well as for the healthcare workers. So first, coming to screening. Screening should include an assessment of exposure to someone diagnosed with COVID-19 in the past 14 days, or unexplained fever, cough, shortness of breath, chills, muscle ache, that is influenza-like symptoms, or any new loss of taste or smell within prior 2 weeks. Coming to the testing part, the ability of testing to detect SARS coronavirus, it is dependent on the the sampling technique and the type of fluid sampled, the test performed, as well as the timing of the test related to the infectious course. So that the test which we use is reverse transcriptase PCR technique, and the reported sensitivity of this test is approximately 70 to 90%, which means that approximately 30% of the infected patients will be reported as free of the virus. And viral transmission may occur up to 3 days before patients may be symptomatic, and the viral shedding is generally undetectable after 21 days following infection. However, it may occur beyond that in cases of severe infection. So as I told earlier, we detect the viral RNA using RT-PCR, and it is used to confirm the clinical diagnosis. The various specimens which can be used, among them the highest positive rates is for bronchoalveolar lavage fluid, followed by sputum. For nasal swabs, it's around 63%. However, the US CDC recommends that collecting only the upper respiratory nasopharyngeal swab because of the increased risk in biosafety to healthcare workers through creation of aerosol droplets if we use any other means. There's also, for testing, you can use antibody also. However, it does not have any role in perioperative screening and risk stratification because it develops in the second week of symptoms. And also not all patients who are infected with SARS coronavirus develop detectable antibodies. Also, they have a potential of cross reaction with other coronavirus, and this results in false positive results. So coming to the guidelines, I'll discuss 5 set of guidelines regarding this. The first is by the Royal College of Surgeons. Although this is for elective cancer surgery, but this can well be applied for any elective surgeries. So they state that all patients who have an elective cancer surgery must have been asymptomatic and self-isolated for at least 14 days prior to surgery. They must have a COVID throat swab within 72 hours of surgery. And this can be done at their home to prevent the need of visit to hospitalization. And wherever practical, patients should self-isolate for 14 days following discharge. They mention about some special circumstances, like asymptomatic patient who lives alone but is not isolated for 7 days. Then in that case, we need to postpone the surgery and ask the patient to self-isolate for at least 14 days. If the patient has a household member with confirmed or suspected COVID symptoms, then again we need to postpone the surgery and patient has to self-isolate for at least 14 days. And wherever practical, after discharge also, he or she has to self-isolate for another 14 days after surgery. Regarding interpretation of results, they say that if the throat swab is negative, we should proceed with surgery. If a patient is positive for COVID on throat swab, then we need to postpone the surgery by at least 14 days and repeat a swab 48 hours before the planned surgery date. Regarding screening for chest CT, they say that according to evidence, a pre-op chest CT does not add to the detection of COVID-19 in asymptomatic isolated tested patients, and therefore it is not recommended for screening before elective surgery. So these were the set of guidelines given by the Royal College of Surgeons. Next is by American College Society of Anesthesiologists. They basically divide the patients into 2 parts, the exposure. When first is whether there is a local or regional presence of SARS coronavirus in the locality. In that case, all patients should be screened for symptoms prior to presenting to the hospital. And the patients who are reporting symptoms should be referred for additional evaluation. And all other patients should undergo the PCR test prior to undergoing non-emergent surgery. They also state that because of false negatives, the droplet precautions should be used by operating staff for operative cases. And before performing any aerosol generating procedure, healthcare workers within the room should wear the protective equipment. Now, if the patient tests positive for SARS coronavirus, the elective surgical procedure should be delayed until the patient is no longer infectious. Now, according to CDC, the patient may be infectious until there are two strategies. One is a test-based strategy, another is non-test-based. So for the test-based strategy, there should be the resolution of fever without the use of fever-reducing medications and improvement in respiratory symptoms, as well as a negative test results for SARS coronavirus more than 24 hours apart. Whereas if the testing is not available, the non-test based strategy is that at least 72 hours should be there since the resolution of fever without the use of any fever reducing medications and improvement in respiratory symptoms. And there should be at least 7 days which should have been passed since the symptoms first appeared. Now then, if there is little or no regional presence of SARS coronavirus, all patients need to be screened for symptoms before presenting to hospital. And if any patient has symptoms which are suggestive of SARS coronavirus, then they should be referred for further evaluation. Next, this is Association of Surgeons of India's consensus guidance document, which was released a couple of days ago. So one of the questions which was discussed was, should we insist on RT-PCR testing before elective surgeries? And so they have told that extending the logic of COVID-19 testing to all admitted patients is reasonable if the cost concerns and the delay in patient management is taken care of. So they have told, they have not taken a clear stand. They have told if cost concerns and delay in management is taken care of, we should go for testing. Now this is the ICMR guidelines for testing, which is the last updated guideline dated 18th of May. So apart from symptomatic cases, they have mentioned that in asymptomatic cases who are direct or high risk contacts of a confirmed case, they should be tested once between day 5 and day 10. However, regarding surgery, they have not mentioned anything about elective surgery as such. But regarding emergency procedures, they have told that they should not be delayed for the lack of tests. And though the sample can be sent for testing if indicated. The last is the European Association of Endoscopic Surgery guidelines. They also said that all patients should ideally be tested prior to surgery. So regarding whether patients should be tested before elective surgery or not, the patients who are scheduled for surgery should always be assumed to be potential carriers of the virus throughout the duration of their hospital stay, even if they pass the pre-assessment triage, including normal temperature, no history of exposure or travel, and no respiratory symptoms. All patients who are scheduled for elective surgery must have a COVID testing done within the last 72 hours. And all the healthcare workers must be mindful that a negative test does not negate the possibility that an individual is infected. So all procedures should be done with standard precautions and the use of PPE. So that is for my part. Thank you so much.
Good morning. Thank you, Abhishek. Abhishek, in his presentation, he has mentioned the sensitivity of test range from 70 to 90%. And so a negative test in a patient will actually give us a false sense of security. So we will have to take precautions while managing these patients. So in the current pandemic, these are the following cases which are operated in our unit and which is as well recommended by many of these societies. In the breast, we have to divide patients as high priority and medium priority. In high priority, we have patients who have undergone breast cancer surgery with complications like bleeding or evacuation of hematoma or revision of flap or excision of flap necrosis, incision and drainage of breast abscess, and those patients who have completed neoadjuvant chemotherapy and breast cancer surgery during pregnancy. So the medium priority patients are like excision of malignant recurrence, depending on the extent of recurrence and the disease biology. Clinically, low risk primary breast cancers and discordant biopsies are likely to be malignant. See, among the other endocrine I'm not able to proceed with the
Okay. You shared the whole presentation?
Yes, sir, I've shared the whole presentation. So among the endocrine diseases in the adrenal, we will operate the adrenocortical cancers, pheochromocytoma and paraganglioma that cannot be managed medically, and hyperparathyroidism with life-threatening hypercalcemia that cannot be controlled medically. And among thyroid cancers, life-threatening or severely symptomatic Graves' disease that cannot be controlled medically, goiters causing airway compromise, and open biopsy to confirm suspected diagnosis of ATC or thyroid lymphoma in order to direct further treatment. So we know that the coronavirus, it spreads by droplet infection. The droplets are varying in size between 5 to 10 microns. However, they can also spread through aerosolization, which have a size of less than 5 microns. So these are certain high-risk procedures, which are the aerosol generating procedures in OT we come across, like the intubation and extubation, tracheostomy, like changing insertion or removal of the tube or suctioning of the tracheostomy tube, while surgery in the open or laparoscopic surgery on the bowel in the presence of gross contamination. So we need to have precautions to prevent the healthcare workers from getting infected. And the general OT setup should be like this. In the hospital, there are two areas. One is a negative pressure room and a positive pressure room. The basic difference between a positive pressure room and a negative pressure room is, in the positive pressure room, the pressure inside the room is greater than that of the outside. So this is basically seen in the operation theater. Whereas a negative pressure room, the pressure inside the room is less than that of the outside pressure. So the infective particles are not transmitted to outside. So ideally, in the isolation rooms in the hospital is a negative pressure room. While operating these cases as asymptomatic or a suspected cases, it is ideal whenever possible to have a negative pressure room. But the problem is, like, most of the OTs world over are designed to be a positive pressure OT. So what we can have is, like, we should have a frequent air changes, like it should be more than 20 air changes per hour, and the air velocity should be 25 to 35 feet per minute, and the positive pressure should be 2.5 Pascal. All OT should have a air handling, separate air handling and filtration unit, and it should ideally have a high efficiency particulate air filters, which
Sorry,
which
Vikram.
has a, sir.
I'm interrupting, but a different slide than what you're speaking is being projected right now. I don't know if you're also seeing a different slide.
So,
Right now,
I'm seeing the OT setup slide, sir.
No, right now what I'm seeing is high risk KGP in OT.
So I know okay.
Yeah, there is slight delay, this thing between slide transmission and what you are speaking, audio.
Okay. So this is the general OT setup I was talking. So all air OT should have a separate air handling unit, and they should have a EPA filters, that is the high efficiency particulate air filters, which has a 99.9% efficiency in filtering particles which are between 0.1 to 0.3 microns. So the temperature and humidity of the operation theater should be between 21 degrees plus or minus 3 degrees, and the humidity should be between 20 to 60%. So what are the precautions we should take before surgery? Any non-intubated patient, before he or she is being shifted to OT, should wear a surgical mask, should have a disposable waterproof gloves, and should have a disposable cap and shoe covers. So once the patient is in OT, during intubation, the surgeons and the OT staff who are not required for intubation should remain outside the operating room till the patient is induced and intubated. And the anesthetists and the anesthesia technicians will ideally don a personal protective equipment, which also includes a N95 and a face shield. So during surgery, the operating surgeon and the nursing staff assisting should don a personal protection equipment. The first is in this order, in the order of, like, first the face mask or the N95 will be worn, followed by protective goggles and or the visors. then the disposable head caps, disposable long shoe covers, following which they will scrubber for that case, and then wear a disposable long sleeve waterproof coats, followed by disposable double pair or nitrile gloves. So providers, we can also elect to don a N95 mask, and these N95 masks, if there is no contamination during surgery, this can be reused. It is shown that the virus will stay on the surface for up to 72 hours. So these N95 masks, if there is no contamination, they can be just kept in a paper bag and kept room temperature for drying, and this can be reused after 3 days. So before starting the surgery, in the operating room, all the eye touch equipments like our laparoscopy monitors in the OT and Bravo monitors in the OT, they should be wrapped with the plastic sheet to facilitate decontamination. We will have to minimize the number of personnel inside the operating room. Even the surgical surgical team should also be limited. And the operating personnel should avoid stepping out of the OT during procedure, and minimal use of energy source with a inline smoke evacuator is recommended. So use of other energy sources like Ligashore or Hormonic, these generate more aerosol, so and should be avoided as much as possible. And while using a monopolar cautery, the lowest possible setting which will give us a desired outcome should be used. So we will have to minimize the duration of surgery, and no surgical or nursing training should be taking place during this period. And the clinical documentation should remain outside the operating room. Like the patient files or the investigation, everything we will have to keep it in a side room, and we should not take it inside the operating room. So after surgery, the single-use personal protective equipment, it should be disposed in a red plastic bag with a seal and is sprayed with 1% hypochlorite solution. So again, during extubation, only those personnel who are absolutely necessary should be in the OT, and the surgeon and the surgical team should be outside the operating room. So before shifting the patient, again, a mask is put on the patient and is shifted out of the operating room. So 1% sodium hypochlorite solution cleaning is recommended for OT tables and trolleys as soon as the patient is shifted. And reusable accessories are cleaned and disinfected with appropriate solution as soon as the procedure is over. And in between two procedures, a minimum of 1 hour gap is to be given. So whether open or lap surgery, even the other societies like the SAGES, they say they have insufficient evidence whether to support for or against laparoscopic surgery. On one hand, we have laparoscopic surgeries which have a faster recovery and like a short hospital stay. But on the other side, the laparoscopic surgeries have a more aerosol generation compared to the open surgery. So the risk and benefit have to be weighed and it has to be individualized. So if at all we are performing laparoscopic surgeries, the incision should be as small as possible so that there is no air leak between the incision and the port. And the carbon dioxide insufflation pressure should be kept to a minimum. And if available, ultrafiltration like smoke evacuation system or filtration should be used. Whatever suction, the wall mount suction we use in the OT, they are not equipped enough to absorb these particulate matters. So it is advisable to use the smoke evacuation system. And before all the pneumoperitoneum should be safely evacuated via filtration system before closure or trocar removal or specimen extraction or conversion to open surgery. So take home messages. Consent should be documented. Probably a special consent should be taken explaining the patient about the risk of contacting a COVID infection in the hospital or the potential consequences for if at all the patient turns out to be a COVID positive later on. And all patients should preoperatively be tested for COVID-19. If needed and possible, intubation and extubation should take place within a negative pressure room, and only essential staff should be participating in the surgical case. And all members of the operating room staff should use personal protective equipment. And electrosurgery unit should be set to the lowest possible setting with inline smoke evacuators.
My topic is on strategy for reducing potential exposure of healthcare workers to COVID infection. So, it's a COVID burden among healthcare workers. As of yesterday, the COVID-19 infected cases in India was 1,47,429. And among those, the data on the number of healthcare workers affected in India is very scarce. Although we have a data like 1,100 healthcare workers were reported COVID positive in a single day or 3 days back, together in Maharashtra and Kerala. And as of now, in Lucknow, no healthcare workers working in COVID area were reported positive. But still, the COVID infected cases among the healthcare workers is on the rise globally and in fact also in India. So we will look upon how, what are the strategies to prevent infection to the healthcare workers. That is stratified as standard precautions, transmission-based precautions, control of environment, cleaning and disinfection, waste management, and hydrochloroquine prophylaxis. So coming on to the standard precautions, that includes social distancing, hand hygiene, personal protective equipment, respiratory hygiene, cough etiquette, prevention of injuries from shower, safe handling of patient care equipment, and principles of asepsis. So to start with social distancing, I'll just touch on with each of the standard precautions a little. Social distancing, as far we have to maintain among the public and other healthcare personnel, at least stay 3 to 6 feet distance from others, especially in the places of crowd. And try to avoid elevators inside the hospitals. If you want to use, then maintain physical distancing inside the lift. And hand hygiene, that's the single most important measure for prevention of infection. When hands are visibly dirty or soiled with blood or body fluids, wash your hand with soap and water for at least 20 seconds. If the hands are not visibly soiled, then rub your hand with alcohol-based preparation for 20 to 30 seconds. And in OT, use a chlorhexidine or povidone iodine containing surgical scrub. So this is the WHO recommended 5 moments for hand hygiene in the clinical setting. When are we supposed to wash our hand in clinical setting? Before touching a patient, before doing any aseptic procedure, or after exposure to the body fluids, and after touching a patient, and after touching the patient's surroundings. Moving on to the PPEs, that includes gloves, aprons, coverall, and facial protection, footwear, everything. And Ministry of Health and Family Welfare have updated on 22nd May that who should wear PPE. Healthcare workers who provide direct care to confirmed or suspected COVID patients, and support staff including cleaners and laundry staff in situations where they may have contact with blood and body fluid secretions, and lab staff who handle these patient specimens can wear a PPE. And which PPE to wear in a non-COVID area? Still, Ministry of Health and Family Welfare have brought in another guideline. In outpatient department, in registration counter, and in consultant chamber where the risk is mild, it's recommended to wear a triple layer medical mask and latest examination glove. And in consultant chamber, it's not advised to do an aerosol generating procedures. And sanitary staff who's cleaning and doing a disinfection, surface disinfection during their duty, also recommended to wear a triple layer medical mask and latest examination glove. And in the inpatient department, in ward and in private rooms, it's recommended to wear a triple layer medical mask and a latest examination glove. And in ICU, where the risk is moderate, it's recommended to wear N95 mask, goggles, nitrile examination gloves, and if they are going to do any aerosol generating procedure, then a face shield is recommended. Coming on to prevention of injuries from sharp. Handling a sharp is one of the most hazardous activities carried out by healthcare workers in the course of their duty. The general precautions while handling the sharp is also applicable to the prevention of COVID infection. These needles must not be recapped, it must not be broken or reused, and a handful of sharp instruments should not be picked up simultaneously. All sharps should be disposed immediately in a puncture-proof container. And transmission-based precautions. It can be either airborne or droplet route of infection. So airborne route of infection occurs through a droplet nuclei of 1 to 5 microns which are disseminated in air, and that can be prevented by respiratory protection by wearing a mask and restricted entry of susceptible healthcare workers and the patient attenders into the patient cabin, and using a acrylic box with a PVC wrap while doing an intubation procedures. And droplet precautions. Droplet infection occurs through respiratory droplet of more than 5 microns in size, and that can be minimized by using a 1 to 2 meter interbed distance, maintaining a cough etiquette, wearing a triple layer mask in the patient while transporting to the OT, as Vikram has mentioned. Air and ventilation is the control of environment. So airborne, this appropriate ventilation can reduce the risk of infection through dilution and removal of infectious particles through air exchange. There are certain guidelines which were recommended based on the minimum ventilation rate, which can reduce the infection rate to less than 5%. In registration area, in OPD and in ward, at least 6 air exchanges per hour should be maintained. If at all, if this air exchanges per hour cannot be calculated, this natural ventilation, it should be controlled with fixed unrestricted openings to more than 20% of floor area. That would achieve a minimum air exchange of 12 air exchanges per hour. So this is the diagrammatical representation of how a ventilated room should have an optimal directional airflow, like the window and the opening in the door, it should be just opposite, and the patient has to sit here. Just like the arrangement what we have in our OPD setting, except for this window is completely sealed in our daycare chemo OPD, that has to be reopened. And this is the arrangement of ventilated room in an IP setting. So we have our supply from the roof. So it's recommended to place an exhaust on the side of the walls so that this room is mechanically well ventilated, as per the recommendation of Ministry of Health and Family Welfare. So coming on to the surface disinfection, as per SGPGI institutional protocol, environmental cleaning to be done twice in each shift. And these surfaces can be divided in two groups: low-touch surfaces and high-touch surfaces. Low-touch surfaces are those with minimal hand contact like walls and mirrors, and high-touch surfaces are with frequent hand contact like doorknob, bed rails, IV stand, bedside tables and counters, and the computers, keyboards, our cell phones, and landlines and light switches and all. So these high-touch surfaces should be cleaned every 3 to 4 hours with alcohol-based disinfectant or chlorine-based disinfectant, or using quaternary ammonium compound. For low-touch surfaces, mopping should be done at least once daily. Moving on to the biomedical waste management for COVID-19 or COVID suspected patients, separate color-coded bins in ward and proper segregation as per the biomedical waste management rules 2016 should be maintained. Inner and outer surface of the bin should be disinfected with 1% sodium hypochlorite solution daily. Use a separate dedicated trolley with labeled as COVID-19, and these waste should be kept separately and debut a dedicated sanitation worker to dispose this directly into the common treatment facility collection van. Hydrochloroquine prophylaxis. Significant dose response relationship exists between the number of prophylactic doses taken and the frequency of occurrence of infection. Another recent investigations from 3 central government hospitals in New Delhi, that among the healthcare workers involved in COVID-19 area, those on hydrochloroquine prophylaxis, they were less likely to develop SARS-CoV infection compared to those who were not on it. And this benefit was less pronounced in healthcare workers caring for a general patient population. And based on these studies, the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare have revised their advisory on the use of hydrochloroquine prophylaxis in healthcare workers. That now they have brought this all asymptomatic healthcare workers involved in containment area and also working in non-COVID hospital and non-COVID areas of hospitals and blocks. They are eligible to take hydrochloroquine prophylaxis, provided retinopathy, hypersensitivity to the drug, Jesus period deficiency, and pre-existing cardiomyopathy and cardiac rhythm disorders or contraindications. So the other general precautions that can help in prevention is provision of a temperature scanner at the entry of OT, an alternative system for biometrics to staffs and other healthcare personnel, and in staff transport, there is a need to keep the alternate chairs vacant. That should be, and they should be scanned for temperature while entering the bus. This is a type of toe pull where we need not use our hands to open the doors with knobs. This is to prevent the surface contact infection. So if you have a symptom of cough, cold, fever, sore throat, please seek the medical advice. An ECG should be taken prior to the start of HCQ prophylaxis, and in the due course of taking the drug, if palpitations, chest pain, and syncope develops, again we have to take another ECG. So the take-home message is healthcare workers working in the non-COVID area also, in fact, have to take much more precautions than those healthcare workers working in the COVID area. Thank you.
Great. So we go ahead with this planned symposium, and the next speaker is Rijoy, and he will be discussing specific issues relating nursing care during the pandemic. Rijoy, are you? Go
Hello.
ahead.
Hello. Can you hear me? Hello.
Yeah, audible.
Good morning. So we can discuss some of the nursing practices that we have to do in OT during the period of this COVID. The first and foremost thing, we have to minimize chances of exposing everyone. So we have reduced the number of staffs. There is a changing duty timings and shift changings. So once a patient comes, the same staff will remain in the OT until the procedure is completed and until the patient gets shifted. And each and every cadre workers are properly
Sorry,
trained.
Rijoy, just
Hello?
a second. Your voice is barely audible. Can you keep your microphone a little closer to your? Yeah.
Sorry. All the cadre workers are properly trained to don, doff, and to maintain precautions, and proper disposal techniques also are taught to them. So once the surgery is planned, the OT attendant wears an N95 mask, and surgeon gown, eye shield mask, and he prepares the OT table, the armrest, and the ventilator machines. Everything are covered with a transparent plastic sheet, and he will be going to take the patient directly from the ward. The patient should come directly from the ward without any in-between stay, and the transportation should be very quick without any obstructions in the transporting way. By that time, the anesthetist and one anesthesia technician will be ready in the OT with proper donning. And we have to make sure the patient is wearing an N95 mask or either a surgical mask while the patient is coming to the OT, and patient has to wear it just before until the time of intubation, and just after extubation we have to give back the mask to the patient. And next is select the OT which is very close to the entrance to minimize the environmental contamination of the entire theater block. And negative pressure OT is to be maintained, and we have to minimize the instruments, energy devices which we are using in the OT. And maximum try to use equipments which are disposable items. So linens, equipments, maximum which we are using now is which we are able to dispose. And in OT, earlier we used to keep gauzes, sponges, scalpels, sutures, everything which is required for an entire day. But now it's recommended to keep only limited number of scalpels, gauzes, sponges, syringes, and sutures, and minimum items to minimize the chances of contamination. So make sure only timely entry into the OT should be made. A scrub nurse should enter the OT only at the time of painting and draping, no need for prior entry. And once the person is entered, make sure they remain inside the OT and they are not allowed to move in and out. And if anything additional is required, that will be provided by the persons who is standing outside the OT, and they will not be allowed to unnecessarily enter into the OT. And when we are using ultrasound probes, we used to provide it with an extra protective covering. And once after the use, the probe is cleaned with the chloroderivative solution, and then we will take it for accelerated hydrogen peroxide fumes sterilization. After surgery, all areas at risk of contamination are cleaned and disinfected. The OT tables, lights, food paddles, ultrasound, infusion pumps, everything are cleaned with Oxivir solution, which is available in a ready-made form known as skim wipes. That's 0.5 percentage hydrogen peroxide wipes. We used to clean such plastic topped materials with this Oxivir, or we can use 75 percentage alcohol wipes. And the floors and walls, the OT walls and floors are first cleaned with detergent and with water. Then we used to clean it with the Virex 1% solution, which is dimethyl ammonium chloride. Or we can use 1% hypochlorite solution also. And the instruments used for surgery are dipped in 1% 1% sodium hypochlorite solution for 30 minutes, and then it is taken out, washed, and kept in metal containers properly labeled. Then it is covered with an extra plastic cover, and then the CSSD is informed, so they will sterilize it in a separate machine, and it will not get mixed with the other non-COVID instrument packs of the other OTs also. So they will be sterilizing it in a separate cycle of machine. The team involved inside the OT, they will be coming out only after the patient is shifted, and they will be going into a separate doffing area, and it is disposed in red waste bags, and then they will have to go to take the shower. The patient, just after extubation, we have to give a N95 mask or a surgeon mask, and then the attendant will be shifting the patient to the isolation room, or if patient requires an ICU, then patient will be shifted to the ICU, and for that purpose the OT attendant has to wear a new pair of PPE kit. So he will have to remove the one which he was using inside the OT during the time of procedure. So he have to wear a new PPE kit, and then he have to shift the patient as quickly as possible. The histopathology specimen, we cover it, we collect it in a polythene bag. Then we have to keep it in an extra polythene bag and with a zip polythene bag which has got a zip bag, and it should be properly labeled, and its outer surface should be cleaned with 1% sodium hypochlorite solution before sending to the histopathology. And OT should be fumigated as quickly as possible using an hexamethyl hydrochloride solution and a dimethyl ammonium chloride, which is available in a ready-made form known as BS500. So these are the nursing practices which we have to follow, and we are following most of these things in our OT.
Thank you, Rijoy. That was really very good summarization of all that we need to follow. And I'm sure there would be many questions. Is Malika ready with her presentation now? Can you make that presentation, or should we discuss the issue of PPEs without a presentation? I can't see Malika joined here. Is Malika? No, I do not see. She has perhaps left the meeting. Okay, so before we start the discussion, let me quickly point out a few things about the PPE. I'm sure all of you have had a fair idea about what kind of personal protecting equipment we require, and then I'm restricting right now to use of these during surgery. Or when I say during surgery, it doesn't mean only while operating. It is while preparing a patient for surgery, conducting the surgery itself, and then taking the post-operative care, making sure that you are well protected even during the post-operative care of the patient. So essentially, we need to have one most important component of protection that we require is protecting ourselves against respiratory infection, because as you all know, the current threat, that is COVID, the primary source of contamination or infection is respiratory tract. So you are expected to use appropriate protection for your respiratory tract. The usually applicable protection or advised application is an N95 mask. What is N95 mask? It's a highly specialized facial mask which provides more than 95% filtration efficacy for particle sizes up to zero point 0.3 microns. So perhaps again, I'm reiterating what most of you would know, that we do not have any equipment, any way of filtering out viruses by themselves. The coronavirus, for example, the size is actually less than 0.1 micron. There's no filtration material available which can filter out the virus itself. What is required is to filter out those aerosols or particles which can carry this virus. Fortunately, the virus in isolation cannot survive. It will not be floating around in the air and you can inhale it. It will not survive. It can survive only in aerosols. And if there's a patient who's infected or another healthcare worker, your co-worker who is infected and he's sneezing or coughing and so causing aerosolization of his or her respiratory secretions, those can be transmitted. You can catch that infection by inhaling those aerosols. So if you use a N95 mask or its equivalent, now various speakers talked about FFP2 and FFP3. These are different nomenclatures. Filtering face piece respirators, that is essentially what these are. So that is one essential part of protection. What is important is, do not think that we can put it on only when the patient is around. You have to put it on at the time of initiation of your shift, and then keep it on until the time you have completed your shift. So in wherever you are in the clinical area, especially in the operating room, which is which is a high risk area for infection, then you must keep it on. You have to have a good fit of the N95. Just merely putting it on doesn't give you protection. It has to fit well enough to ensure there's no passage of air or any aerosols around the mask. So it has to fit well. Second part of the protection is protection to rest of the body. Now you can divide into four parts: the head and neck, the torso or the main body, the feet or legs, and then the hands. So if you are concerned that the patient may be carrying infection and you want to protect yourself completely, you should be using adequate protection to head and neck, which can be given by the eyes can be protected by using goggles or a face shield, and the whole of the head and neck can be protected by using a hood, which are all available. The torso is to be protected by use of appropriate coverall. Now, especially while operating, it is impossible or very difficult to use a jumpsuit kind of a coverall which covers the entire body, because that makes it very difficult to be mobile, or flexibility is compromised. And especially after scrubbing, it is difficult to put it on. So the other option is a wraparound kind of gown that we are so used to, the surgical gowns, but we have to make sure that these are sufficiently protective. They have to be impermeable to any blood or body fluids, even at a pressure. Now, the usual pressure that we talk about is 35 kilopascal, or in other words, 35 centimeters of water, or so that kind of pressure should, the protective equipment should be able to withstand that kind of pressure of blood or other products. So, and then these are exactly the kind of gowns that we have in the OT. The feet and legs have to be protected against any splashes, because you take along with you any splashes, any contamination you are subjected to in the operating room. So you must cover your footwear with appropriate kind of long enough shoe covers or leg covers, and then the hands, you have to have a double pair of gloves, impervious to all kinds of things, which we usually do. While all of these are available, You have to get used to using them appropriately, correctly, and also ensure that there's no wastage of these. You cannot, these are vital supplies in the current current era. So these are second most important component in our fight against this pandemic in the hospital area. The first most important component is you yourself. So no amount of material can prevent or help tackle the pandemic unless we have a committed and a well-trained workforce. So you yourself are the most vital component of this fight. But then the second most component is appropriate PPE. This can be used only when we use them. These can be used continuously or on a long-term basis only when we use it rationally and judiciously. If we wither them away, we waste them, we will land up with a situation where we'll no longer be able to get it. I'm aware there are a lot of areas in the hospital where N95 masks, for example, are being taken away by certain hospital staff. It is everybody's responsibility to check this, not just, for example, the sister in charge. She cannot allow anybody from the entire team, including a doctor and a professor or whosoever. We must make sure that things are used only for the purpose they are supposed to be, and not wasted. So that was in nutshell the PPEs. I'm sure we can have more discussion about it. But now we have some maybe 10 minutes remaining with us for some discussion. Dr. Anjali had a question. Dr. Anjali, can you go ahead, please?
Yeah. I had this thing question, or rather this thing comment. During Abhishek's presentation, he emphasized that all patients who have to undergo elective surgery, they have to undergo COVID test. So there is this thing, recommendation by American Society of Anesthesiologists that 2 tests should be done at interval of 24 hours in case patient tested positive. So is that right, Abhishek? If a COVID positive patient has to undergo surgery at 4 hours interval, 14 days after patient tested positive.
Abhishek, can you hear us? I think this is a good time when all of us can switch on our videos. I'm not asking to switch on the mics, but do not unmute yourself, but at least switch on the videos unless you cannot for some specific reason, so that we can see everyone. And I'll also take a screenshot if possible, just for documenting who all attended. Please, whosoever has to speak will have to unmute himself or herself. Abhishek, please answer.
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am, you're right.
So why I'm this thing? Why
We
I
have to
want
wait for 14. Hello.
Yes, Abhishek, you are audible.
Yes, ma'am. It's recommended that we have to wait for at least 14 days once a positive test is, once the COVID test is positive for a patient. That's what the guideline.
So, but it is not recommended for a patient who is asymptomatic and who has tested negative once. So we have to.
If the patient is tested negative,
Yeah.
then it's required. Yeah.
So no society recommends that we need to have 2 distinct COVID tests in cases of asymptomatic low risk patient, isn't it?
Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, because why I'm bringing this point is that this is because, as we know, there is a protocol committee meeting going on, and this thing, in fact, anesthetists are insisting that we need to have 2 COVID tests. So at least we should be preparing ourselves with the evidence, so that if we come to that point of discussion, then we can provide them appropriate evidence for or against.
Yes, ma'am.
So any other questions or comments? Dr. Mishra, would you like to say something? Dr. Gyan, Dr. Sabha?
Can I ask one question?
Please go ahead.
So just I want to know whether these precautions for universal precautions for positive patients or non-positive patients, non-COVID patients. In all patients, we have to practice the same practice or it is different?
So I think Vishwak can take that question.
So these precautions should be considered for all patients in non-COVID area as well, as because all patients should be treated like as they are COVID positive, even if the screening area temperature is normal for these patients. As per the guidelines, this has to be maintained for all patients in non-COVID area as well.
Can I add to this? See, while it is a good practice to protect ourselves against an unknown threat or unseen threat, but I don't agree with calling any patient as or considering any patient as COVID positive. Once you have tested the patient for COVID infection, corona infection by appropriate means, and you have screened them for any clinical manifestations which may put them in a group of false negative patients, then we cannot consider them as COVID positive any longer. But perhaps the reason why all these precautions or all these protective strategies have to be adopted at all times is that you're not only protecting against yourself against the threat posed by the patient who's in front of you. You're also protecting against the threat which is posed by the environment. See, don't forget, especially in operating room environment, which is the positive pressure as pointed out by Abhishek, there is a possibility, there is data to suggest there is suspension of aerosol in a positive pressure area for quite some time. And unfortunately, howsoever we may try, we will not be able to isolate our work area from rest of the hospital areas. There can be other areas in the hospital, patients being treated in other areas who can create aerosolization. The previous patient treated in the adjoining operating room may be positive. So it is not just the protection from the patient right in front of you, but also protection required from the environment and your co-workers. As healthcare workers, we're all at a relatively higher risk of contracting corona infection. We may be asymptomatic. We are not usually tested. Patients are tested. So, for example, this morning when we are operating, who knows that one of the anesthesia team members or one of us, the surgeons, may be carrying the infection and we may transmit to the others. So that is the reason why these are called universal precautions, because they have to be used universally. Of course, there are specific precautions or preventive measures to be taken when you're dealing with a known COVID positive patient.